Cedar Point is every coaster enthusiast's dream. Located out on a 364-acre peninsula on the banks of Lake Erie is one of the single largest collection of rides at any park on the planet. We're talking 70 different attractions, including 17 roller coasters, which is a lot for one park. There's a reason it inspires people from all across the world to make a pilgrimage to Sandusky, Ohio, to try it out for themselves. It is an experience and is a destination. I have friends from across the ocean who spent years saving up their money to one day visit Cedar Point. That's how popular this place is. Everyone in Ohio knows Cedar Point. It is a behemoth of a park to tackle, and in this video, we're going to be discussing the history of the park, the various rides and attractions, what makes it so good, but also what are its flaws? What could they improve on? And what have they improved on? You know, the park has been open since 1870. That's over 150 years of history. Even since I started going back in 2015, it is amazing to see the changes that have taken place. The parent company of Cedar Point, Cedar Fair, treats this as their flagship property. They receive constant new investment season after season, which is also what keeps people coming back for more. They pull an average of over 3 million visitors every single year, people who will typically spend more than one day on property, which is honestly the ideal situation. Especially if you're visiting Cedar Point for your first time, you gotta do at least 2 days, maybe even 3. And in an ideal world, you also stay on site. Cedar Point has many different forms of lodging that you can take advantage of, the signature of which is Hotel Breakers, an on-site hotel that dates back to 1905. From there, you can look out your window in one direction and see the sprawling skyline of the park, or look out the other direction and see the banks of Lake Erie and this beautiful 1.5 mile long beach. I've only stayed there once. It was actually during my first ever visit to the park, and I had a great experience. During one of my most recent visits, however, I got to try out Lighthouse Point for the first time. This is where you can stay in a small cabin at the back of the park, literally like right next to Magnum's Turnaround. I highly recommend that if you have a group that's larger than what would fit in a hotel room. The convenience is unmatched. There's a separate entrance so you can come into the park from the backside, which is extremely helpful because Cedar Point is huge. It is this very long and skinny layout. And if you're coming in through the main gate, let's say you want to get to the back over by like Steel Vengeance, it is a hike. Prepare to do a lot of walking, which honestly you might not even start really feeling until towards the end of the day. Because the way it's set up, there are so many different rides and attractions directly next to each other that if you're just doing rides as you go along, you won't even realize how far you've walked until you check your health app at the end of the day and you're like, wow, I walked 17 miles. Been there, done that. That's when staying on site is nice because then you can just immediately pass out. It's either that or drive back to Cleveland, Toledo, Columbus, or wherever you might be from. If you're staying local though, I will just warn you, Sandusky is not a huge town. There's only so many hotels to choose from. And to be honest, a lot of them are old, run down, and overpriced. And they can get away with it because there's nothing else around here. The other big downside with Sandusky is if you don't have a car, you're kind of screwed. The park is not really accessible by public transit. I think if you really want to, you could find a Greyhound bus or like take the Amtrak into Sandusky, but that could get really complicated and time consuming. I'd suggest renting a car or take an Uber. I've even done that before from the Cleveland airport. It's probably like $60 to get there. But if that's your only option, then you gotta do what you gotta do. And let me just say, there is nothing quite like driving down that causeway. This is the road that you'll take to get into Cedar Point. You're right up against the water. You look out to your left-hand side and you just see this perfect skyline view of all those roller coasters. And it gets me every single time. It can't help but put a huge smile on your face. It builds anticipation for what you're about to experience. It's about as epic as an arrival can get. And if you do happen to stay on site, your drive gets even cooler because then you can hang around all the way to the back side of the park, driving up right next to Millennium Force, Maverick, Steel Vengeance. This is also where you're going if you're visiting Cedar Point Shores, which is their separate gated water park. In all my time that I've been going to Cedar Point, which is almost 10 years, I've never actually visited Cedar Point Shores, but I've seen it from Magnum plenty of times. It seems alright. They're definitely tight on space, but that's not just limited to Cedar Point Shores. That's the property as a whole, because obviously you have water on all sides. It means anytime they want to build something, they either have to take something out or get really creative. And towards the end of the video, I'll talk about some of the things I'd love to see here in the future. But let's walk through the different areas of the park, starting with what is my personal favorite front gate entry experience at any amusement park in the world. Because you literally have this massive roller coaster going over your heads, threading the needle that is these 2 keyhole towers. It is so iconic. What they did here with Gatekeeper is nothing short of amazing. It is a perfect first impression, it is memorable, and it's a 10 out of 10 photo op. Once you pass through the turnstiles, actually the first ride you're greeted with is the carousel, which honestly I love because even though at its core Cedar Point is a roller coaster park, the carousel is one of the most important rides in their history. It dates all the way back to 1946. And for a place as old as Cedar Point, I love it when they lean into their history. The other really old attraction up front is Blue Streak. It's the only wooden coaster in the park dating back to 1964. It's very much a family coaster, one that rarely gets a line, but it's still some fun moments of weightlessness and has been well maintained over the years. An underrated ride in my opinion. And one of the other marquee attractions of the Cedar Point Midway is the Sky Ride. The park has two different main modes of transportation. The Sky Ride is up front and there's a train in the back. All this does is take you down to about the halfway point in the park near the base of like where the corkscrews are for Corkscrew. But honestly, with the weight it usually gets, it's faster usually to just walk. You really just ride this for the views. And seeing as it's got rides and water on both sides, this is a must for photos. I think it's here when you really realize that there is roller coaster track everywhere you look. And the color palette that's been selected for each of those attractions is so purposeful. Cedar Point is like a photographer's playground. Fantastic views from the ground and even better views from the air. Whenever you ride any of the roller coasters, take a look around you as you're going up the lift hill. They're also picturesque in their own way. My personal favorite is the view from Valraven and then also Steel Vengeance. But shout out to the view from Magnum because it's so tall that if you look across, you can actually see Canada. You're really not that far when you think about it. As you're walking up and down this main midway, you'll also see flowers and just beautiful landscaping down the center. It's one of the prettiest sections of the park, even though it's not themed. Cedar Point really is an amusement park, not a theme park, but you do have a bit more theming when you get towards the back. This is more of just like a classic Americana kind of feel. Like if you go over to the right-hand side, that's when you encounter the boardwalk. It's Cedar Point's take on a classic boardwalk-style amusement park. And honestly, they did a pretty good job with it. It included a brand new Wild Mouse roller coaster, probably one of the best wild mice out there. And I love that they went with a custom layout and not just an off-the-shelf model. And then the biggest new addition with this upgrade, the Grand Pavilion, which actually harkens back to Cedar Point's past. They brought it back and it's a brand new restaurant with some great food. There's a bar up top, balcony seating on the roof, and also indoor seating down below, which is important because Cedar Point is out on a lake, which means you get lake weather, aka conditions change rapidly. So sometimes it'll rain when it wasn't even in the forecast. And to be honest, there's not many places at Cedar Point where you can really take shelter, not too many indoor locations. This is one of the few restaurants with indoor seating, so take advantage of it. Next door is also the Giant Wheel. That's another attraction that can give you fantastic views from the top. Back when Cedar Point used to have a bobsled coaster called Disaster Transport that they removed to make way for Gatekeeper, they also had an observation tower called Space Spiral. For the longest time, that was the highest point in the park for you to take photos from. Now it's the Giant Wheel, which they actually relocated. It used to be down by Millennium Force's turnaround. That's one of several attractions in the park that instead of removing, they've just shifted to a different area of the park to make room for something else. They did the same with Calypso, formerly Tiki Twirl, and also Matterhorn. They're very strategic, which I admire. Now, next door to the boardwalk, we have two different kids sections. There are a total of 3 in Cedar Point, but these two lands are next door to each other. That's Planet Snoopy and Kitty Kingdom. And in my opinion, these are some odd areas that they probably should do something about. Planet Snoopy is made up of a collection of rides that they relocated from the closed Geauga Lake theme park. Just kind of shoehorned in there, and it's nowhere near as nice as Camp Snoopy back by Gemini Midway. Kitty Kingdom, on the other hand, has the smallest attractions in the park. Very, very basic, most of them just going around in a circle. And it just looks outdated. And do we really need 2 kids' lands next to each other? Well, probably not. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see this change in some sort of way in the future. So before we move on to the second half of the park, the last few attractions I'll just briefly mention. Max Air, a massive Huss pendulum. Super iconic, don't like the restraints. So overall, it's never been a favorite of mine. Windseeker is a 300-foot Mondial attraction, which gives you fantastic views of the beach as well as the park around you. But despite its name, be wary of this one because this is a ride that often goes down during high winds. Gatekeeper, which of course I mentioned earlier, beautiful ride, but like Max Air, not a huge favorite of mine. I think it's one of the weaker wing coasters, but I am a huge fan of the other B&M across the Midway, Raptor. This thing has an action-packed layout, is a long ride, also has beautiful colors, and has a roar to it. Whenever Raptor's going around the course, you know it. That is my favorite B&M coaster in the park, which Cedar Point has 4 of them, the other 2 being Rougarou and then Valraven directly next door. What's cool about Valraven is that it is one of 8 different rides in the park that are over 200 feet in the air. That is wild that one park could have that many attractions over that height. 5 of those are roller coasters, the other 4 being Top Thrill 2, Magnum XL 200, Millennium Force, and Steel Vengeance. And in case you're interested, the other 3 rides that go over 200 feet are Power Tower, Windseeker, and the Slingshot. So I know I didn't cover everything in the front of the park, but I want to move on to the back half, because at this point you have a choice. You can keep going straight ahead towards like Corkscrew and Top Thrill 2, or you can hang a slight left towards Millennium Force, and regardless of which option you choose, it'll loop back around into essentially one big circle. For the sake of this video, we'll go left. You'll see a large stage up ahead. That's where sometimes they have live entertainment, which has always been spotty at Cedar Point. They've tried out different things, but none of them have really stuck around for super long. It seems like management is very aware that people come here for roller coasters, and so live entertainment is really just a bonus. I can't imagine that people are super upset if they don't have it, if that makes sense. Iron Dragon is the next family coaster you'll encounter. It's one of the few aerodynamic suspended coasters left in operation. 2 lift hills, goes out over the water. Real tame ride. There's not a ton of family-oriented roller coasters in the park, but this is one of them, and I like how it winds through the trees. Next door, then, is our last B&M coaster, and that is Rougarou. It opened as Mantis, a B&M stand-up coaster. In 2015, it was converted to a floorless coaster. I never got to do it as Mantis, but I always thought that Rougarou was better than people give it credit for. It's probably the least popular high-thrill coaster in the park. It's very pretty, but it often doesn't have a long line, and most people ride it once and then move on. So if there ever came a point where the park had to make a decision of what high-thrill coaster to remove to make way for future expansion, I could see this eventually getting the axe, but I don't think they would just bulldoze it. Honestly, it'd probably get relocated somewhere else. But a ride that'll probably be here forever is the roller coaster directly next door, Millennium Force. And Cedar Point has always been well known among coaster enthusiasts, but I feel like Millennium Force is the ride that really sent them to the next level. It opened in the year 2000 as the first ever Giga coaster, meaning a ride that stood at least 300 feet tall. To this day, it's only one of 2 of its kind, and despite numerous new roller coasters opening since then, still remains a fan favorite among guests. It's tall, it's fast, it's got scary views going up the lift hill, and just about anyone can enjoy it, including kids, because it happens to have a lower height requirement, surprisingly. The one word of warning I will give is watch out for the bugs, especially if you're riding towards the front. During the early summer, Cedar Point encounters mayfly season, where these small flying critters are literally everywhere. The nights in particular are super bad, you'll just get covered in bugs. It's like actually disgusting. Last thing I'll add about Millennium Force that is not exclusive to this ride, but something that I really appreciate. It is station music. This is just a little added touch that really helps get riders hyped up for what they're about to experience. Gatekeeper has it too, as well as Magnum XL 200. Top Thrill 2 has it in the plaza with this ready-to-go remix from Republica. And if you ever got the chance to ride Wicked Twister before it closed, that also had station music. So we'll move on from Millennium Force and enter Frontier Trail. This is where the theming really takes a step up. There's not much to do here in terms of rides. It's primarily just an area that you pass through to get from like Millennium Force towards Maverick. But I love all these old wooden buildings, Fort Sandusky. There's tons of trees everywhere, which means shade, something that isn't super common at this park. There's also plenty of photo ops and lots of smaller activities for the kids, such as pony rides. And contrary to popular belief, they do not offer camel rides or goat rides.
Yeah, I think you guys are supposed to be in there. Hi!
I mean, hey, if I was a goat trapped at Cedar Point, I'd want to get out too, so I could go ride some rides. Last thing I really want to cover from Frontier Trail is this parcel of land right here that is currently sitting empty, because I swear it's cursed. Everything they've tried to build here has failed. So first we have Shoot the Rapids, a water ride that only made it 5 years following an unfortunate accident. Then we had Dinosaurs Alive, which was an underwhelming upcharge attraction, but at least it gave good views of Millennium Force. It got replaced with Forbidden Frontier on Adventure Island, which was a cool concept, but it required a lot of staff. And I think was a tough idea for some people to wrap their head around because it required some level of live action roleplay, which not every guest can really get into, so that didn't make it very long. And then most recently, there was a river cruise that actually went around the island. There was like the park's own take on Jungle Cruise with a live skipper and different actors during the experience. It was a nice scenic ride, but after the first year, the entertainment team members were swapped out with ride operators where maybe acting wasn't their forte. And it made the experience less than what it was originally designed to be. And so even that got taken out. So I applaud the park for trying things that are different, and it does make me sad when they don't end up working out, but I hope that one day we see a more permanent ride here, and that's the key. I really think it has to be a ride in order for it to work, because too many people just walk through this pathway not stopping to do anything, and I think they need something to get people to stay here. If there was any way to fit a big old wooden coaster like a GCI or Gravity Group, that would definitely be my top choice, but I also like the idea of a water coaster here. At the present moment, Cedar Point only has 2 water rides, and they are actually directly ahead. They have a set of rapids, and then Snake River Falls, a big boat ride with one big drop. So as you exit the trees, you are now approaching Frontier Town. And especially within the past couple years, this has become like the place to be. They're home to arguably the 2 best rides in the park, Steel Vengeance and Maverick, a cute family classic called Cedar Creek Mine Ride, an S&S Scream and Swing called Skyhawk, one of the largest of its kind. And this is also where that train that I talked about earlier will drop you off. There's a really well-themed section they'll take you through called Boneville. And if you ever reach a point in your day where you really want to take a breather and relax, this is the place to do it. It has a much calmer vibe than the front half of the park, which is very busy. Here, there's lots of tables and chairs set up, and it's just a really charming atmosphere. All the facades look really nice, although I was sad to hear that they closed the Town Hall Museum. That was like the one place where you could really just dive into Cedar Point's past, and I hope that it comes back because they had a lot of really cool displays in there. But if you want to hear more about Steel Vengeance and Maverick, there's actually full separate reviews of both of those attractions, as well as pretty much all of the major roller coasters at Cedar Point. So that's why I'm just glossing over most of them, because as you can see, there is a lot to cover with this park. So we'll move on then to Gemini Midway. And this actually has a very similar feel to the boardwalk. I feel like if you put these 2 sections right next to each other, it'd feel like one cohesive area. It's just embracing the idea of a classic Americana amusement park. Lots of bright, colorful rides plop down next to each other. I love the string lights going across. It makes this whole area pop at night. If you happen to be here after dark, this is easily the best looking section. And of course, their marquee ride is Gemini, a racing steel hybrid coaster from Aerodynamics. It's so much fun racing alongside your friends, but unfortunately, if I had to predict the next roller coaster to close here at Cedar Point, this would probably be it. It does sit on a huge plot of land, and it's really old. It doesn't mean I want it to close, but I think one day it's bound to happen. I just hope that they would replace it with something else that would become iconic. I almost think about a ride like Hang Time at Knott's Berry Farm, how well that ride works in their own boardwalk section. I feel like that would pop here, but I think it would all depend on capacity, because the reality of this park is that the lines can get huge. Most of the roller coasters here run 3 trains if they can, and no less than 2. It's important that the park builds people eater attractions. Rides like Magnum XL 200, which is literally right at the end of this pathway, can do like 1,400 people an hour on 3 trains. That and Gatekeeper typically pull the highest ridership every year. They require crews to work fast, and I think that's why so many coaster enthusiasts go to work at Cedar Point. They build experience in the industry, specifically ride operations, and keep coming back each season because they have so much pride in Cedar Point. It becomes part of their lives. You'll get employees from all over, including sometimes different parts of Europe and Asia. They'll do like a summer job program with a work visa, so people will just come and work at Cedar Point for a season. Adjacent to Gemini Midway is our third and final kids area, which I had briefly mentioned earlier. This is Camp Snoopy. Their claim to fame is they house the first ever Intamin roller coaster. It also happens to be the smallest coaster on property. That's Wilderness Run. Then there's also an off-the-shelf Vekoma roller skater next door called Woodstock Express. And then as you exit the land, we're greeted with the original hypercoaster, the most controversial ride in the park. It's Magnum XL 200, a ride you either love or you hate. Let me know down below where you stand with it. But that coaster is positioned in a corner of the park that as soon as you round that, we're at the Top Thrill 2 Midway. As of when this video is being made, this is the newest section to get a revamp as a very general racing theme to coincide with this massive attraction. Definitely go check out that review if you want to hear what that ride is like. But also in this plaza is Power Tower, a massive S&S combo tower. 2 sides shoot you up, 2 sides thrust you down. And then lastly, Corkscrew, the first roller coaster in the world to take riders upside down 3 times. If it hasn't become obvious, Cedar Point has a thing with breaking records. I want to say like 10 of the currently operating roller coasters at Cedar Point broke at least one record when they opened. So now that we've gone through the park layout, let's talk about some recommendations. And I feel like the big one is dealing with the lines. If you have an eligible pass or are staying on site, I highly recommend early entry. That'll get you into the park an hour before the regular guests, and is a perfect way to knock out sometimes multiple attractions before everyone else even gets started. And if you only have one day at the park, you'll probably want Fastlane. They can get really busy. And the problem is, when it is slammed, even Fastlane can be a long wait. Fastlane doesn't make the lines go away. I've seen Fastlane have a 60-minute wait when the standby is over 2 hours. And the sad part is, it's not because the Fastlane is like really cheap and too many people are buying them. Fastlane is actually pretty expensive, and it still doesn't deter people from getting it. So if you want to avoid that, then I definitely recommend being strategic with when you visit. Obviously, weekdays are going to be better than weekends. Avoid major holidays, and if possible, visit maybe towards the end of the summer after Ohio's schools are back in session. That'll for sure make things more manageable. But if you do happen to go when it's slammed and you don't have the money to shell out for a big expensive fast lane, one thing I love is that they sell individual skip the lines now. It's like Lightning Lane at Disney. So you just go on the app, select which attraction you want to skip the line for. It's a one-time use, and if you just need it to get on that one ride, then it's definitely worth it. Another tip, try the food and as much of it as possible. If you don't have a meal plan, then yes, getting lunch or dinner here is probably going to be pricey. But Cedar Point and really all the Cedar Fair parks in the chain have really put forth a lot of time and energy into upgrading their food division. Each of the park's restaurants are fantastic. And I never used to say that, but my top recommendations are Backbeat Q over by Magnum, Farmhouse in Frontier Town, or the Grand Pavilion in the Boardwalk. But shout out to Panda Express, because Panda is great and the smell radiates through the air as you're riding Millennium. It's kind of awesome. If I had to recommend one place to skip, at least for now, maybe it'll change in the future, but I'm not a big fan of the Frontier Inn back in Frontier Town. There used to be a Chick-fil-A there, and that was a lot better. The food they replaced it is just really not that good. Another point, something to be aware of. The lockers at Cedar Point are very inconsistent. You never know if you're going to need one for your loose items until you get there. Basically, if you're coming to the park with a bag, be prepared to pay for an all-day movable locker so you can experience each of the major rides. The ones you're going to need it for are Gatekeeper, Top Thrill 2, Rougarou, Millennium Force, Steel Vengeance, and Magnum. All the other rides have bins on the ride platform, so you just bring your items up with you. So to wrap things up here, Cedar Point is an icon. It's the second oldest operating amusement park in the US. What started off as a simple public bathing beach has really grown into something remarkable. And it's inspired so many people to develop a love for roller coasters. Like, no wonder there's so many coaster enthusiasts in Ohio. Anyone who grows up riding rides this good is going to develop that passion. When I was a kid, I wanted nothing more than to go to Cedar Point. I remember getting all this merchandise for Christmas that my family bought on this online store, and I'd walk around wearing it even though it was a place I'd never even been to. But ever since my first visit in 2015, I've gone back every year since. And to be honest, it wouldn't feel right to skip a year without going to Cedar Point, and I know that not everyone has that luxury. And it's definitely had an effect on how I view the park. Unfortunately, the more I go, the less special it's become. I don't find it quite as exciting as it once was, and maybe it's because over time I've also realized that this is not the perfect place I idolized as a kid. It definitely has its flaws, and honestly my number one criticism of Cedar Point isn't even something you'll notice when in the park. It actually has to do with how they come across online. There's an unspoken superiority complex with Cedar Point, a general vibe of we're the best and we know it, which is kind of off-putting. For the longest time, Cedar Point was the winner of the Golden Ticket Award for Best Park in the World. And it's possible that that might have gone to their heads because there's a cockiness or arrogance that you don't really get with other parks. And I know a lot of other people have noticed it too. And I hope that changes one day because it's just not necessary. I think a perfect example of this is when Top Thrill 2 closed shortly after opening, and all the blame was pointed to Zamperla instead of taking any accountability for the fact that Cedar Point knowingly took the risk with buying a prototype. But all they did was point fingers. Parks and manufacturers are supposed to be working together as a team, and throwing them under the bus is just silly and uncalled for. There's a reason most other parks don't do it. But anyways, that's a whole side tangent. Please don't let that deter you from going, because I know that not everyone in the park has that same complex. From my experience, the customer service here has actually been pretty great. And you know, as much as me going to Cedar Point for this long period of time has made me more aware of their issues, there's also the flip side to that I've really grown to appreciate the park in ways that I didn't originally expect. I have amazing memories here from the Steel Vengeance opening day running of the bowls, after hours axe throwing, riding a mechanical bull, sitting on Steel Vengeance over and over again during ERT, chilling in a hot tub after a long day, walking all the way back to Magnum's turnaround, boat tours, live music on the beach. One time they had a silent rave going on there. That's awesome. So obviously, if you get the chance to visit Cedar Point, of course I recommend it. Just prepare yourself before you make your first visit. The park is very big. It can get kind of overwhelming. You're probably not going to get to do everything in one visit, but if anything, it's a great excuse to go back. So let me know down in the comments below if you visited Cedar Point, if you agree with the things that I brought up, and let me know what I missed. Because even though I've been talking for over 20 minutes straight, believe me, I know I didn't cover everything. But if you like what you see, you can also check out the Park Reviews playlist. It's got reviews from parks all across the world, organized in alphabetical order by their name. Go check it out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.